I want to test the sound, make sure everybody's going to be able to hear me. Okay, looks like that's going to work. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started a little bit early. I'm going to share the screen so that you can see what I have in front of me. Hello. Okay, so let's see here. We're going to go ahead and start with the week 4 PowerPoint presentation, and it does provide some clarification for you on the issues of measurement and how to test the measurement and make sure it's credible and reliable. That's probably the most difficult part of the design of the study. So let me just go ahead and get started with what we have here because the PowerPoint keeps me on task. First of all, I don't know if you guys are aware of this or not, but it's going to be very helpful to you in the future. The instructors get an activity report for how often students sign on, if they're signed on, if they're actively involved, or if they're not actively involved, how many times communication takes place between the instructor and the student, and then when submissions are made, if they're on time or if they're late, and where that student scores in comparison to other students. In addition to that, it keeps a running total of the amount of times you have logged on and what you have viewed. For example, if next term you take a different class and you wanted to use a paper from this course, so you went back in to Canvas to look up that paper and use those same resources, that new instructor would be able to tell that you had revisited an old course. And then finally, it keeps a running total for me of how many hours and minutes you have been logged on and what the most recent activity was. So my question is what is your return on investment? If you have only spent 10, 12, 14 hours this term on your course, then you're probably not reaping the benefits of the course. If I have spent more hours on the course than you have, then you're probably not getting a whole lot out of the course. And I think I'm at like 15 hours right now so far for this term. Some of you keep the Canvas system up while you're doing other work, and the hours just add up in total, but the activity is really what I like to take interest in and figure out when are people signing on, when are they doing their work, and how are they communicating back and forth. So just as a reminder, your initial discussion board posts are due tonight by 11:59, but I always give an extension until Thursday. Most of you, I think all of you all, have already submitted your initial post this week, and I have given some feedback. Just a reminder, go back into the discussion and scroll down to the value-added feedback that I provide every week, because there's some reminders in there if you missed something in the original part of the assignment that you need to go back and tack on. I'll make a comment there to the group. So make sure you do both parts of that discussion posting rather than just talking about your variables. Okay, so we talked a little bit about scales of measurement last week, the differences between nominal, ordinal, and interval, and that's not too confusing by now. At the very beginning, it was probably a little bit confusing, but by now it's not really that confusing. But when we put in the types of scales and the properties, it can get a whole lot more confusing. So what I have on this chart here, which is available to you on the PowerPoint if you need to reference it again, is the type of measurement, which we've already talked about, the type of attitude scale, which are examples of scales that you might use to gather that type of data, the rules for assigning the number or the numerical amount, the typical application, and then the statistical process that goes with it. So this is kind of like the answer to your design of study if you haven't received it yet, if you didn't look at it ahead of time. And that's why a couple of people who turned in papers early, they kind of missed out on this piece here where you talk about the statistical evaluation. And so I want you to be able to use this information because it's very helpful. The type of attitude scale for like a nominal or a naming measurement would be yes or no. It's dichotomous. It's one or the other. It's identical or it's different. And then the applications for that might be by sex, by geographic area, by social class, and so on and so forth. And so the statistics that you use, usually if you use nominal measurements, are percentages, proportions, mode, and the chi-square. You have to understand what these things do, but you don't actually have to use them. So don't stress out over that right now, because like I told you before, if you ever get to the point where you use these in a study, you are able to hire people or get help on actually doing the math if that's what stresses you out. In the ordinal type of measurement, your attitude scale is comparative, ranking, itemizing, or a paired comparison. You're looking for greater or smaller. And then your ranking, for example, a student's preference or a teacher's preference, or the class standing. Are you first in the class, or are you last in the class? And then the statistics that go there are the percentile, median, rank order, correlation, and ANOVA. Then for the interval types of measurement, the type of attitude scale you would use are the Likert scale, and you guys use Likert scales all of the time. If you do a survey where you have to say often, frequently, often, rarely, and never, that's a Likert scale. So where you have radio buttons or you choose a ranking, but it's not a ranking for exact measurement, but do I like this best or least? Then there's a Thurstone, the staple associative, and then the semantic differential. And those are all different kinds of tools that you can use. And these are examples of tools that you can use. Rules for assigning number is the distance between one point and another, and adjacent ranks are equal as far as the amount of space that they take up. And that's where you have a fixed scale, such as a grading scale, an index, or attitude measures. And the type of math is what I like to reference that you use for those items are mean, standard deviation, t-test, ANOVA, and regression. And these are all for quantitative studies. So let me talk a little bit about variables again and research hypothesis. I want to take a couple of steps back and then lead you up to where you're ready for the assignment this week. You are going to indicate in your hypothesis that there will be a difference between variables, or there will be a relationship among the variables. And so let's say, for example, if your hypothesis is that leveled reading instruction increases the student's reading performance. Now, remember, in a hypothesis, you're making a preliminary decision. You're not saying, does leveled reading instruction increase the student's performance? You're saying that it does or that it does not. And then you're testing that information. So the independent variable is the type of reading instruction in this study. The type of reading instruction, such as ability grouping, if you put students, advanced students all in a group, or lower performing students all in a group. And so it's constant at the beginning of the experiment, and it has nothing to do with the other variable, how the students are being instructed. The dependent variable is student performance, and that's measured by the test scores. So the primary object of study, what are you really studying? You're studying performance, you're studying achievement. And so the object that will change based on what the independent variable does to it is the dependent variable. So I tried 100 ways to explain this the most simple way possible, and this is what I've come up with. So you might want to take a look at this PowerPoint after the class, because everything just tends to run together, because you're choosing variables, you're choosing measurements, you're choosing types of data analysis, you're choosing types of studies, and all of these choices can be confusing. So if you just take it one step at a time, it will make more sense. So let's go back to this. Now we're going to talk about the measurement that goes with those variables, because that's part of what you're doing this week. So again, the leveled reading instruction increases students' reading performance. That's my hypothesis. The independent variable will be measured nominally. So for example, group A, that's a nominal label, it's a name, will receive leveled instruction. Students' names will be kept anonymous and individually identified with letters A through S. Student A, student B, student C. It doesn't mean that student A is smarter than student C. It just means that A is identifying this is this student, B is the other student, C is another student. So does that make sense? Okay, good. The dependent variable is the student performance. And so the test scores is what we're going to look at, the reading test scores. So I'm going to use an interval measurement, which is basically the 10-point grading scale. So a grading scale is a very typical interval measurement if you're looking at scale scores or actual grading scales. So here's where we start to look at null hypothesis or alternative hypothesis, and this can get very confusing, so I tried to put it as simply as I could. If you want to test the research question, you will develop a research hypothesis. So for example, our research question was, does leveled reading impact student achievement? So we turned that into a hypothesis, and I think it does, or I wouldn't be asking the question. So we would say leveled reading instruction impacts students' achievement, or we might even say leveled reading instruction increases student achievement. So then you would develop a null and an alternative hypothesis. So we have the research question, we have the research hypothesis, and this is with quantitative studies. You do not have a research hypothesis with qualitative studies. You base it on your research question, and then as you gather your data, it takes you in the direction that the study goes. So you're predicting the results of the test in the research hypothesis. So for example, leveling for reading instruction increases students' reading ability. The null means that it is not true, or it is not because of leveled reading. So the null doesn't mean that it reduces students' reading ability. It's not the opposite. The null just says, nope, we can't prove it with our study. That's all it means. So leveling results in no difference in students' reading ability. So if we had a leveling group and a group that was not leveled, and they perform the same, or if we had a group that was leveled for 3 weeks and then not leveled for 3 weeks and the growth was the same, we would have to say the null hypothesis is true, because leveled reading does not impact students' reading ability. It doesn't increase students' reading ability any more than heterogeneous grouping. So the alternative hypothesis, and this was what was really tricky for me when I first started studying research, the alternative hypothesis is just the research hypothesis. It means, yes, the results are true. I was right. It's the same as the original prediction. I don't know why we call it the alternative hypothesis, because the name itself implies that it's something different from the research hypothesis, but it's the alternative to the null. So just keep in mind, as you use the research language and you write your design of study and you write your proposal, if you're doing quantitative analysis, you're going to use the terms research hypothesis, null hypothesis, and alternative hypothesis. So just as a note for you guys, you are not required to actually conduct the study and complete the statistical analysis. Thank goodness, right? You are required to write a lucid research proposal and articulate which types of statistical measures and analyses would be appropriate for your study. So the relief is you don't have to do a t-test and ANOVA and find out the standard deviation, but you do have to decide if that would be an appropriate analysis tool for your study. So one of the things that I did to help you guys out, and I posted it as feedback today on your discussion board, was this quick video clip from Statistics Learning Center. I'm just going to play a few seconds of it, and I think it's in a British accent, but it's still pretty easy to understand. It takes the types of data and analysis and puts it in a really easy to understand format.
Nominal, ordinal, interval ratio. Data is central to statistical analysis. When we wish to find out more about a phenomenon or process, we collect data.
Okay, so I'm not going to show the whole thing for you because I never do, but it's a quick 6-minute video, and it even talks about the types of analysis and sampling you need to use for different types of data. And it's definitely worth 6 minutes of your time. And about 500,000 other people agree, according to what YouTube has here for us. So if that many people agree and that many people are looking for clarifying data, it's got to be good. So in your assignment, remember that you're doing the design of study. Make sure you talk about the instrumentation, and most of you all are talking about that already, but remember you have to include statistical procedures. Now, if you're doing a qualitative study, this is not written, obviously, everywhere you turn, because most people do quantitative studies, and most research instructors are quantitative people. But if you do a qualitative study, you must mention triangulation, and that means you gather data in 3 different formats to validate your information. You can't just ask one person the same question. You have to get sources of information from multiple resources in order for it to be valid. And so that is a term that I discussed with you last week, and there's also quite a bit of information, and I also included links. So make sure if you're doing a qualitative study, you look up the term triangulation. Okay, so at the bottom of this assignment, it says references. The references that you're using for the design of study are the references that you include in these few pages. However, when you do your complete proposal, your references will be the references from all of your sections that you've done throughout the study. So let's take a look at the much more complicated rubric that we've started working with. So conceptual understanding. Have the concepts be interpreted correctly? Is the paper insightful and original? Could this study actually take place? That is what I ask myself when I take a look at your paper. Does this method match the research question? Are the methods thoroughly discussed? Tell me what the method means. Tell me that this is a qualitative study. Tell me that they're going to do an open-ended survey, and you're going to do interviews, and you're going to do observations, which is 3 methods. That's how you will have triangulation. When you write the proposal, you actually tell us that you know what methodology means by giving the definition of the methodology. That's something that's different in the area of graduate research. You actually tell your reader that you know what a methodology is by defining it. Use of language. Does this paper reflect graduate level writing? Is it concise and grammatically correct? Is academic vocabulary present? Which means I'm not using casual language. I'm not using don't and ain't and isn't and won't. I'm using language that you would expect to hear in a classroom being discussed among students who are working on master's degrees or beyond. The elements and components, are all of them present and meaningful? Are they logical? And does the writer show depth of understanding? You've got to go beyond a book report. You have to show the passion for what you have written, and you have to prove to me that this study could be conducted. The content, are important issues raised with this study? Is it consistent with the research, and is the purpose communicated? And the best one of all that you guys love more than anything is APA style. Is the proposal presented in a professional academic format, and is APA style consistent from beginning to end? Now, you guys are so lucky that your professor is a former English teacher, and I teach college English on ground as well. So I am able to help you with your format, your English, and your content. And I know that it's difficult because it's like you're having 3 classes at once, but it will make you smarter and better when you go on to the next classes. And your instructors will be very happy that you know how to do those things. So you're getting 3 classes in one for the price of 1. How's that? Okay, so as you talk about variables, you're going to describe independent and dependent. You're going to talk about differences or correlation, differences for independent, or relationships between correlational variables. So correlation means relationship, and if you have an independent, you're looking for a difference. And then this is where you guys forgot. Describe the level of measurement of each variable. So you need to mention, are you using nominal, ordinal, or interval, or all 3, or 2 of the 3? It's easy to say nominal because that just means you're labeling things so that you can keep them organized, and you're keeping it in a neutral format. You're not showing any bias there. But you also need to determine ordinal or interval. And I will just go ahead and tell you, if you're doing a qualitative study, you may not use interval, but if you're doing a quantitative study, you will use, if not all 3, you'll at least use nominal and interval. So in your initial posting, we've talked about this before. Is it logical? Is it easy to follow? Is it professionally written? Does it integrate multiple perspectives? You guys have done a great job on your discussion board posts, so I'm not really concerned about that. You guys are actually ahead of me on the discussion board posting. So this group is keeping me very busy. So one last warning, your final assignment is not to simply turn in all sections of week 2 through 5. Your final assignment consists of a complete APA formatted research proposal. The proposal is very specific, and you will need to rearrange some content and elaborate with greater detail in several sections. This is where you really need to take a look at the exemplars and look how it's laid out and how much detail those students go into. The template, I give you coaching information. Other instructors are doing that now because I helped redesign this class so that other students would be able to understand what to do by example. So you are using all of those pieces, but you may have to rearrange some. You may have to write another introduction. You may have to give some more specific information. And depending on whether or not it's qualitative or quantitative, it might look a little bit different. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware that you're just not like copying and pasting all 4 assignments for 4 weeks together into one big paper. So does anybody have any questions?
Yes.
I thought so. Okay. That's usually why you sign on. How do you guys like the lake behind me? This is
Oh my God, that's amazing.
This is where I spend my.
Show you what we have over here.
Yeah.
This is where I spend my summer. So through the school year, we're at home, but we're up here probably 80% of the time from June 1st until the second week in August. So it's very hard for me to stay on task up here. I'll get a notification on my phone and I have to come back up to the porch and I have to grade a paper or something like that. But it is a nice view. So we're just we're actually at the entrance of the Smoky Mountains. So I could flip my screen around and show you guys Mount LeConte that I can see from the water, but I won't do that because we're supposed to stay on task. But anyway, okay, so ask me a question.
Okay, so initially I started with qualitative study, and then I felt the need to add the Likert scale, the survey questions. So it's kind of shifting to a quantitative study.
Yes, because yes, you can do that. Let me tell you the difference. In a qualitative study, you don't know what the answers are going to be. For example, if you asked 100 students, describe your dream school, they might say good food at lunch, elevators, teachers who care about me, and no school on Friday. That is qualitative. You don't know what they're going to say, but you're going to record those answers. And the more people you talk to, you're going to see trends. Okay, school day shorter. They want teachers who care, nice teachers, teachers who stay after school, or they want, bad food. So you're seeing trends there. That's how qualitative the data starts to lead you. And so you're organizing the data after you get it, which is very unsettling for people who are linear thinkers like math people and science people, but it works great for humanities people and English people. So if you use a Likert scale, you're asking them to choose one of 4 or 5 choices that you have provided for them. So it's not open-ended. It's not from the perspective, the creative perspective of the participant. The choices come from the researcher. So you can shift from qualitative to quantitative, but the credibility of your study is going to require more work on quantitative because it depends on what your Likert scale is measuring. So you can switch that, but you have to remember to go back and switch everything from the very beginning back to looking at quantitative. Okay, so yes, you can definitely do that. And it does take longer to do a qualitative. However, if you can really figure out what people think and what people think other people think, and then if they're actually doing what they say they're doing. So it's really interesting from the human perspective, but some studies just don't lend themselves to that. It just depends on specifically what you're studying. What is your study on?
The impacts of standardized testing on teachers and students.
Okay, so you are moving from how it makes me feel, right? Because if you say, but you want to direct it, you're looking for some specific outcomes so that you can categorize them together, right? And say, well, this is what happens when. So that's okay. But are you looking at the achievement measure also, or just how?
I'm looking more at the anxiety level. I'm looking more at how they feel, how that test makes them feel, as opposed to just a classroom setting and a topic or a lesson, a unit test.
Right.
So I'm trying to compare the feelings.
I could see you doing that either way. For me, if I were writing the paper and doing the study, I would definitely go back to the open-ended, and I would say something like, how do you feel the night before a test? And if they say, well, I'm really anxious. Okay. Then you can follow up with a question. Do you tell me about how well you sleep? But then if you did a Likert scale, you could say the night before a test, A, sleep well, B, don't get any sleep. So you can narrow it. So I can see where you could use the ordinal measurement as well, because you would want to say this many kids are extremely stressed out, this many kids, you know what I'm saying, stressed out to the point where they can't focus or they can't eat or they can't sleep. So yeah, I think that will work out okay.
Okay, so can I maybe use both qualitative and quantitative and just add on?
Ooh, no, I wouldn't. I don't. The reason why I don't recommend that, especially for a beginner study, is because you have to use statistical analysis, and then you would have to use triangulation. So,
Okay.
I mean, if you wanted to go into the qualitative range, you could observe them while they were taking the test, and then observe them right before the test, and observe them right after the test, and then you could interview them and have them talk to you and pay attention to the tone. So that's how you triangulate the qualitative. But if you're doing a Likert scale, you're putting them in categories, which is the total opposite, because qualitative the results create the categories, and quantitative the results are already determined.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
I just wanted to ask, hold on a second. I just wanted to ask and see if, what is it called? If I'm doing the whole, I don't even know what the name of the
You know
section
what? Let me see if the other person is muted, you might not get feedback like that. Let me see. Let me try to get everybody's face on my screen at the same time. So I'm going to, okay, everybody's on mute. Okay, go ahead. Try it now.
Okay. Since I'm doing the research design right now, I'm doing the whole research study.
Design of the study?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm at the part of the instrumentation and the instruments that are being used. And I'm at the part where it's describing the type of assessment or the type of way you're going to test what your independent variables are going to be, which are the tests. And I wanted to know if I'm using like a standardized test, like a Florida standardized test, do I need to include information about it being a valid or reliable test?
No, I wouldn't necessarily do that. I would just say that I'm using the Florida Standard Assessment and use the name and actually cite it in references. And if you were really going to conduct this study, you'd actually include information from the website that could be printed out. But if you have a link to the website that explains it, that's fine. And you want to say that it's standards based. So the Florida standards are the
that's what I put. Okay.
So yes, if it's a tool that's already been created, you don't have to include a copy of it, but you do need to include in your references a link to it. And so yes, if it's a standardized test, it's already considered a valid measure because the state uses it for like determining how smart every person in the state is. So,
okay. Thank you.
Which we know doesn't really measure how smart you are. Okay, any other questions? Okay, all right, we did well. So next week on Wednesday, I am going to show you a completed proposal and have you ask questions. Of course, I'm very ADHD. That's why I have to have a PowerPoint presentation keeping me on task. I struggle sitting down for long periods of time and I tend to get off topic. So I have to keep it in front of me, but I do want to show you some examples of great things that I've seen. But if you have specific questions, let me know. And I said you cannot resubmit in week 5 because of the turnaround for grades. However, if you want to submit early for feedback, I will read your paper without scoring it and give you some advice and send it back to you so that you can make changes before the deadline if you get it to me before Friday, because I have to have time to take a look at it and send it back since everything's due on Saturday. And then, of course, this week, you guys know if you want to resubmit any assignment, any of the 4 prior assignments, this is like an amnesty type of thing I do at the end of the term because you're basically redoing everything anyway for your proposal. You have to email me by Friday and let me know which assignment you want to redo. I will make space for it. And then even if you had like a problem with similarity score in the beginning and you had 25% was taken off with your resubmission, if you make other changes and turn it in, then there'll be no penalty. So it's like a totally forgiven assignment. But pay close attention to the grading scale, because I will tell you that there are only 100 points in the term, and if you're already at an A, it might not be worth going through the trouble of resubmitting it if your A is not in danger, or whatever your goal might be, an A or a B or whatever. But you're welcome to do that. Just make sure you email me and let me know that you're planning to resubmit. Okay?
Right.
Okay, well, email me if you have questions. I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. I'm usually pretty good about emailing quickly, but it is summertime, and of course, we never really get a vacation if we're doing online school. So just let me know, and I'll be here to help. And there should be plenty of examples. And this should actually not be the hardest part of the term. I think the literature review is the hardest part. So that's already behind you. So email me if you have questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, take care.